Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we're in round 10 of our coverage of the 2016 Canada's tournament. Winner of this tournament goes on to face Magnus Carlsen in November for the World Championships. Our two competitors today, Fabiano Caruana playing the white pieces representing the United States, Vishy Anand representing India, playing the black pieces. Both these players near the top of the leaderboards. Vishy Anand tied with Sergei Karyakin with 5.5 points, and Caruana is just half a point behind them. He, just a few rounds ago, was near the bottom, and he has kind of stormed his way back with some key victories to fight and only be a half point behind. So, huge game for him playing the white pieces, and Vishy Anand looking to just take sole possession after Sergei Karyakin tied today. So, he can kind of catapult himself to be the front runner. But we'll go ahead and get started. Pawn c4, getting into the English opening. Pawn e5, kind of somewhat plays like the reverse Sicilian. Knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6. So getting into the four knights defense. Pawn g3, getting ready to fianchetto on the king side. Bishop down here, b4. Fianchetto, bishop g2. Castle on the king side, castle on the king side as well. And then Vishy Anand plays pawn e4. And this is such an awkward spot for this pawn for white to have to deal with. You know, Fabiano really doesn't want to have to move his knights right away now. Instead, he would like to control the center of the board, but he hasn't moved either of his central pawns right now. Decides to go and play knight g5. Both of his knights are attacking the square right here, and black really only has one defense. And so he's almost forced to play bishop takes on c3. So pawn recaptures here on c3. Does have a double pawn structure on the c file, but white does now have a double bishop pair. Rook to e8, just solidifying this pawn just a little bit more. And then pawn to f3, trying to break up this pawn. Me personally, I'm going to be playing pawn to d3 here to break it up. Anytime I fianchetto to the king side, I do like to keep this pawn here on f2. This little pawn structure is a little bit easier, I think, to defend. But pawn to f3 in this position is going to be completely okay, especially with your opponent's dark square bishop off the board. You don't have to worry as much about someone attacking if your pawn pushes forward here to f3. But if you were to play pawn to d3 after the exchange right here, pawn d6 opening up the door for the light square bishop, rook over here, b1, trying to control this semi-open file. I think this is going to be a fine game for whites. But Fabiano decides to go ahead and play pawn to f3. And then after the exchange, we have the knight come back to f3. Interesting to note, still haven't even moved after 10 moves any of the central squares from Fabiano. So definitely seems like a variation that he's studied quite a bit. Both Vishy Anand and his second, which is just kind of his helper training coach, if you will, looking at different variations. Many players have variations that they are better at than even some of the greatest grandmasters out there. So Vishy and his second are both familiar with this line specifically. So very interesting to see Fabiano go down this line and not really try to control the center of the board with his pawns. Pawn d5, now pawn d4. Now deciding after 11 moves to go ahead and start to attack. Pawn takes on c4, and then queen to c2. And this is kind of a novelty, something different than we don't usually see in this position. This is the book move so far until queen to c2. Usually you're going to see bishop g5 pinning down that knight right here, but instead we see a little interesting move, queen to c2. Kind of took Vishy Anand by surprise. I don't think he's kind of prepared for this specific move, and he seemed to have a tough time with it for a while. Vishy continues pawn h6, just solidifying this square here on g5, which is kind of that common move that we talked about, bishop g5. Even if he later wanted to play knight to g5, this does kind of stop that in its tracks. So bishop b4, kind of the next best alternative, does want to make sure it's aggressive in the center of the board, and there's no reason to bring it to e3, blocking off his pawn. Getting here to d2 does absolutely nothing at all. So bishop to f4, and then knight down here to e4, rook d1, protecting the center of the board, bishop down here to f5. So Vishy Anand, although he kind of took some time, wasn't exactly sure how he was going to approach this. has a pretty active position. I do like the way Vishy Anand is kind of controlling the center of the board. Although he doesn't have any central pawns, which is not the strategy you want, he's doing a good job of controlling with his minor pieces. So we see Fabiano kind of doing the same thing in return. Knight to e5. Now this knight comes back to d6. Pawn e4, forcing the bishop back. Queen e2. Looking to attack on the king side, and all of a sudden Fabiano now looks like he has kind of a more aggressive position on board. Knight back to e7, so Vishy seems to be retreating a little bit, trying to play a little bit more defensive than trying to control the center. Since he just doesn't have any pawns, you can only do so much. And then we see a pretty nice sacrifice. So if we kind of look on this board state and say, what is white going to do? My first response would not have been take this pawn here on h6. Not even one of my first 4 moves, and that's why I really like how Fabiano approached this game. He's going for gold. He recognizes he's down a half a point. He wants to represent the United States, playing in the United States later in November for the World Championship. There's no other reason to play bishop to h6 unless you were just going for it. After the pawn takes, we do have the queen come up here to h5, looking to take this pawn here, so getting 2 pawns for that bishop, and just still has some pretty aggressive pieces. This rook is involved, can easily get this other rook involved. Although his opponent does have now more material, he doesn't necessarily have all of his material involved into the action. So Vishy decides to go ahead and give up some material back so that he can make sure that he doesn't lose the position. So knight to f5, giving material back. Pawn takes on f5. Now queen to g5. Once you kind of get in a tough spot, you want to take the biggest pieces off the board that your opponent has. Queen to g5 says, hey, let's go ahead and sacrifice our queens. So after the exchange here, then pawn to f6. And this kind of stops a lot of the moves that black has to maybe retreat. His king is forced to stay on this side of the board. If it ever wants to centralize, it's going to kind of have to go the long way. So nice little move from here. This pawn can never be attacked by this bishop here. So all in all, I do like Fabiano's his approach. Even though he has his queen off the board, he does have still a nice little attack on the king side. Knight to e4. Rook here to e1, protecting this, and then knight takes on c3. And this is one of those moves where I think Vishy maybe miscalculated. It does seem like, okay, he gave up, his knights. He's trying to get back in. If we count up the pawns, we have 6 pawns for white. We have 6 pawns for black. Maybe he's trying to get a little advantage here, taking with his knight on c3. But he's actually just going to end up losing material in this spot. Knight here, or rook here to c1, attacking both the knight, attacking this pawn behind it. This bishop here on g2 is attacking this pawn on b7. There's so many threats, there's no way for Vishy Anand to kind of hold on to this. Right now he's forced to move his knight. So knight back here to b5. Not really going to be a great option if he takes here on a2. Still just going to lose this pawn. He's going to end up losing one of the pawns up here. It's just all going to be bad. Later on, after the bishop takes here on b7, the rook's going to force to move, and then rook to a1. It starts to get pretty messy for black. So Vishy Anand plays knight to b5, but then bishop b7, forcing the rook to move. The rook comes over here to d8. Now, we could say, okay, let's bring our rook to b8, just attacking the bishop, forcing the bishop to move. But that's going to be completely okay. All of a sudden, we just say bishop to d5, or attacking this pawn here on f7, which is check, and the knight is protecting it. The only way, also attacking this pawn here on c4, only way to kind of protect up here, since you really don't want to be playing your king to h8, because then you can just take with your knight here. Things start to get really, really bad. But knight to d6 does stop this, but now all of a sudden rook to c4, and even if the knight takes, then we just see check, and then after the king moves, the knight is going to fall. The knight's now threatening to come up here to d7, so we can see rook d8 trying to stop that. Bishop to b5 now attacking this rook. It just gets really, really complicated. You could try to stop it if you want to with pawn c6, but just start to gobble up material. All in all, there's just too many pawns, too many passed pawns. There's no way for Vishy Anand to really deal with this in a really good way. So after bishop to b7, Vishy Anand correctly decides to not worry about rook to b8. That's going to be tough. Now instead, bring his rook over here to d8. Fabiano can now play bishop to c6, which is also tough for Vishy Anand to deal with, attacking both the rook and the knight here on b5. After the knight takes on d4, we see the bishop take on e8. And then after the rook takes, we see the king start to get involved into the game. White is up in material. He definitely has a more active position on board as well. Just so tough for Vishy Anand to kind of deal with this. Knight down here, c2. Rook here to d1. If the rook would just take here, then we could just see the bishop take here on c2. So for those who didn't kind of see this bishop over here, that's kind of what he is doing. So attacking the rook here on e1, rook to d1, bishop down here e4, just centralizing, still protecting what it was, and then also just trying to protect, making sure maybe he doesn't want to deal with this king here to f3. He's already kind of stopping the king here to e3 because of his knight. So just trying to thwart off any attack. Knight to c4 since it was being attacked by the rook from e8. Now rook down here e6, rook here to d8, just getting all up in the business of Vishy Anand. King h7, king down here g1, rook f6, rook over here to f1, just saying, hey, we're going to go ahead and exchange these rooks off board. Then I'm going to have a rook and a knight in game versus just your two minor pieces. That's always going to kind of favor the player with the knight and the rook. Just can control way more of the board. And in this position, Vishy Anand decided to go ahead and resign. Now, I will say that in this position, I am a little bit disappointed that Vishy Anand resigned. Do I think he's going to lose? I think he loses 90% of the time. I do think he can find a draw the other 10%. I don't think he wins any of them against Fabiano, but after only 33 moves in this position to resign, maybe he's just trying to hold on some of his energy for later games. Recognizes he's in a losing position, doesn't want to exert any more energy, but all in all, especially for the fans, being the leader in the tournament, I wish he would have fought on for just a little while longer. But in this position, Vishy Anand decides to go ahead and resign. Fabiano catapults. All of a sudden, he is tied for first now with Sergei Kardiakin. That's what Vishy Anand did yesterday after he beat Levan Aronian. And all of a sudden, Fabiano does the same thing to him. So we have a very tight race at the top of the leaderboard with 6 points. We do have Fabiano Caruana, and we do have Sergei Kardiakin. And then with 5.5 points, Vishy Anand did not go anywhere. And then Levan Aronian as well, who tied today, so jumped up from 5 to 5.5 points. So the end of this tournament is going to be exciting. We have 4 rounds remaining, so make sure you guys check those out. It's going to be a good one. Thank you guys for watching. All the other matches, just if y'all are keeping track at home, ended in a tie today. This was the only victory. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.